2014, as has been pointed out, Scotland voted to remain in the UK, and it did so on the promise that the only way to ensure our EU membership was through voting no to independence.
When we considered the issue of independence in 2014. Back then, those who were opposed to Scotland being independent said that voting to stay in the United Kingdom was the only way to ensure our membership of the European Union.
But if we said no to independence, Scotland would stay in the EU has been broken, and broken spectacularly.
Huge interest in independence. We sit here on the 5th anniversary, actually, of the independence referendum. 45% of the people of Scotland voted to leave the UK to remain in the EU, and indeed 55% voted to stick with the UK because we were told that was the only way to guarantee economic stability and our place in Europe.
We were told in 2014 that if we stayed in the United Kingdom, our rights as EU citizens were going to be respected. Boris?
About to deliver a speech to the European Policy Centre. In that speech, I'll be setting out very clearly and very strongly the massive contribution that Scotland makes to the European Union, and also the benefits, particularly in terms of jobs through the single market, that we get as a country from being part of the European Union. If Scotland votes to be independent in the referendum at the end of 2014, it is the strong position of the Scottish Government that we should continue to be a member of the EU because of the contribution we make and the benefits that we get.
Do you concede at all that there is some division in legal opinion and that some people do argue that you would have to reapply?
Well, I'm a lawyer by background. I know that if you have two lawyers, you'll end up with at least two different legal opinions. But I believe that although the law is important, and I would challenge anybody to find the treaty provision that would provide for Scotland or any part of the European Union territories being put outside of the European Union because they exercise their democratic right to self-determination. That would not only, in my view, be against the spirit of the treaties, it would also be against the founding principles of the European Union. So law is important, but as you see in many other things with the European Union, it's not law or process that settles these matters. It's negotiation based on pragmatism, based on mutual self-interest. And on that basis, I absolutely believe that Scotland will continue to be a member of the European Union because it's right for Scotland, but it's also right for the rest of the European Union.
And what about the rest of the UK? What about the possibility of an in-out referendum in the UK? Could that not completely muddy the waters if your negotiations actually don't keep to the timetable that you set out?
Well, I believe our timetable is realistic, and as I've already said, others have expressed that view as well. I hope and I expect that by the time the UK has a in-out referendum, if that does happen, then Scotland by that time will have become an independent country. But I think the position of the UK government and David Cameron in particular does really underline the fact that the risk, the threat to Scotland's continuing membership of the European Union doesn't come from the prospect of Scottish independence. It comes from a growing Euroscepticism within the UK government and that possibility of an in-out referendum. I believe that would be the wrong road for Scotland to go down, but that would be the risk for Scotland if it opted to stay within the United Kingdom. Of course, the big risk, in my view, to Scotland's continuing relationship with the European Union and continuing membership of the European Union is not the prospect of Scottish independence, but it is the prospect of an in-out referendum promised by the UK government. So the message that I'll be delivering here in Brussels today is very much a positive one. We are and want to continue to be a constructive part of Europe, contributing to and influencing all of the big policy agendas, but we want to do that as an independent member state because that gives us the ability to assert and protect and articulate our vital national interests.
5 million people. We understand that we can't act in isolation. Whether as part of the UK or as an independent country, we know that partnership is essential for progress. And so the fundamental vision of the EU, of independent nations working together for a common good, appeals to us. And some of the concerns which often get raised about Europe in the UK media, especially about sovereignty, possibly carry less weight in Scotland. After all, Scotland has been pooling sovereignty in one form or another for many years. We've always been a nation that has looked outwards to the rest of the UK, to Europe and to the wider world. And it's worth noting that this would have remained the case even if Scotland had voted last year to become an independent country. There's absolutely nothing contradictory about independent countries recognising their interdependence and choosing to pool some sovereignty for mutual advantage. On the contrary, that is the way of the modern world. And as part of that, I think in Scotland, most of us are essentially very comfortable with the idea of overlapping identities. We know that you can be Scottish and British, Scottish and European, Scottish and Polish, Scottish and Pakistani. And that's one of the reasons that the independence referendum last year, and this is a credit to both sides in that referendum, was such a peaceful, inclusive and democratic debate. And it's also perhaps why nobody really in that referendum argued about whether Scotland should be a member of the EU. The debate on both sides was about how best we could continue to play our part. In fact, the ability to participate more fully in international bodies such as the European Union appealed to many of us on the yes side of that debate as an additional positive reason to seek national independence.
Said no to independence, Scotland would stay in the EU has been broken and broken spectacularly.
Huge interest in independence. We sit here on the 5th anniversary actually of the independence referendum. 45% of the people of Scotland voted to leave the UK to remain in the EU, and indeed 55% voted to stick with the UK because we were told that was the only way to guarantee economic stability and our place in Europe.
As has been pointed out, Scotland voted to remain in the UK. And it did so on the promise that the only way to ensure our EU membership was through voting no to independence.
Perhaps why nobody really in that referendum argued about whether Scotland should be a member of the EU. The debate on both sides was about how best we could continue to play our part. In fact, the ability to participate more fully in international bodies such as the European Union appealed to many of us on the yes side of that debate as an additional positive reason to seek national independence.
Pubs and clubs across Scotland. In 10 days' time, its citizens will vote on whether to become an independent country. A yes would have huge implications for Edinburgh's future relationship with the EU. Earlier this year, European Commission President José Manuel Barroso handed a boost to British Prime Minister David Cameron, who backs the No campaign. Barroso said in an interview in February with British television that Scotland would have to reapply to join the EU.
This position that has not changed is on the record. It is not our role 10 days before the vote to interfere in the campaign with new statements that will be taken up partly here and there.
Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond insists that an independent Scotland would remain inside the EU. Vivien Pertisseau of the French Institute of International Relations disagrees.
It will have to apply to membership, so it will have to ask the Council to vote on a potential membership. The bigger risk is if Scotland arrives with a lot of demands. If it applies to the EU, we don't want the euro, we don't want to be part of Schengen. That's going to be extremely difficult for Scotland to have all those opt-outs that it's been enjoying as a UK member.
The result will be watched very closely by independence movements elsewhere in Europe.